Hey guys, tonight we're sailing back to one of the most dramatic battles in Chinese history, the clash at Red Cliffs. You've probably seen the fiery images in movies, or read the scenes in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, where the sky itself seems to split open in flame. But what really happened on that winter river, and what was later embroidered by storytellers until it became legend? Tonight we'll sift through the smoke and whispers to find out. Do you dare find out how it was done? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The winter of Tam-ce wrapped the Yangtze in a veil of mist. The river's broad back moved slowly under a cold moon, reeds ticking against one another along the muddy banks. From up current came the creak of timber, and the low murmur of oars. Cow's northern armada easing south, line after line, as if the horizon itself had grown ribs. The numbers you've heard are theatrical boasts of 800,000, but even cautious historians would still concede an immense sight. A mobile town of decks and masts, braziers glowing like scattered embers on the water. You can imagine the smells: pitch and wet rope, smoke and river silt, the sour edge of travel-worn leather. Many of these soldiers were not river fighters. They were men of the northern plains, used to galloping across dry ground and measuring distance in hoofbeats, not currents. On the Yangtze, the world narrowed to planks underfoot and a waterway that set its own tempo. Seasickness nibbled at discipline. Restlessness arrived on nights when the fog swallowed all landmarks, and even veterans felt unmoored. Logistics tugged at the campaign like an unseen current. Fodder piled up for horses that had little to do. Grain sweated in damp holds. Medicines stretched thinner each week. Commanders wrote crisp orders, but downstream the ink blurred with dew. A drum could still thunder at dusk, yet the fatigue of a long march cannot be drummed away. Victory is easy, at a map table. Out here, it must be carried crate by crate, plank by plank, and sometimes the river simply shrugs at human plans. Cow's reputation drifted ahead of his ships. He was the architect of northern order, the consolidator whose name made doors open and rivals fold. Villagers along the southern banks watched the forest of masts and whispered, would he absorb Jiangdong as he had the north? Rumor, like mist, thickened at the edges of sight, until the imagined army grew larger than the real one, and fear did the multiplying for free. Across the water lay a different kind of strength. Sun Quan's court glowed with lantern light, while councillors argued into the night. You can picture lacquered tables scattered with scrolls, the smells of ink and pine resin mixing in the warm room, frost silvering the eaves outside. The young lord weighed submission against resistance, survival against honor. Letters arrived bearing Liu Bei's seal supplies dwindling, followers exhausted, yet hope stubborn. The question turned in the air: fight a giant on his terms, or make the river choose sides? On the water, the debate translated into tiny movements. Patrols adjusted their routes, watchfires changed their spacing, signalers rehearsed patterns until muscle memory replaced thought. On fog-thick nights, two scout boats might drift closer than intended, and then back away, each side tasting the other's presence, like a spice that burns late. The south knew the river's mood sits, crosswinds and shoals, its narrowings that punish carelessness. The north carried momentum, numbers, and the confidence that past victories lend to any plan. Illness walked the decks with a soft step. Coughs seeded themselves in crowded quarters. Fevers rose and fell. These are not details that make heroic paintings, but they are details that decide heroic paintings. A captain counts spears and forgets blankets. An officer posts sentries and forgets that rest is a weapon. Upstream, a scribe folded a blank letter and waited for orders that had not yet taken shape. Downstream, someone practiced a speech of surrender and then tore it up. Waiting, more than marching, became the test. Far out in the midstream dark, settle the camera on a transport's deck. A cook lifts the lid of a pot, and steam ghosts upward. A junior officer walks the planks counting not men, not crates, but lanterns. Across the drifting black, a reed bed shivers and stills. An owl disappears into the fog with the silence of an idea leaving a mind. The stars exist beyond the haze, but down here they are rumors of stars. And that is how stories feel before they harden into history. You might be expecting a grand speech here, a single line that turns the world. What came instead was small, practical thoughts that only later dress as prophecy. Stability in winter swells might be worth the risk of lashing vessels together. Training land soldiers to move as if the deck were a field might be more wish than plan yet. Wish and plan sometimes share a bunk. Across the line, someone considered whether stability could be turned into a trap, whether a forest of masts could be made to burn like an orchard in drought. Red Cliffs is remembered for its blaze, but its truth begins in this hush. The quiet, the fog, the fatigue, the careful weighing of terrain against momentum. If you're listening while the room around you is dim and safe, maybe you can feel that same long inhale, the moment before events crystallize. History gives us many such hours, when the most important action is stillness, and the most important decision is patience. So we let the deck creak, and the water touch the hull in gentle, repetitive syllables. We let officers finish their rounds and cooks bank their fires. We let council halls darken as candles drown in their own wax. Morning will come, and the river will look unchanged. Yet beneath the surface, the balance will have shifted by a finger's width, just enough to tilt the day toward the version of Red Cliffs you already carry in your imagination. The spark, the ruse, the wind, can you feel which one the night is quietly choosing? The council halls of Jiangdong glowed long into the night. Candlelight flickered across carved beams, while the voices of men rose and fell like waves against a seawall. At the center sat Sun Quan, young, wary, and weighed down by responsibility that had come far sooner than he wished. His hand rested on the arm of his chair, the lacquer warm beneath his palm, as one counselor after another urged surrender. The North, they said, was unstoppable. The Yangtze was wide, yes, but against Cao Cao's numbers it would become no more than a moat in front of a collapsing wall. You can almost feel the pressure in that room, the way fear sharpens whispers and turns practical men into pessimists. But not every voice leaned toward capitulation. Enter Lu Su, the diplomat whose calm tone cut through the noise like a reed flute in a storm. He argued that Cao Cao's army, while vast, was brittle. Disease had already weakened them. Their unfamiliarity with river combat tilted the balance back toward the south. Most importantly, he warned, submission now meant servitude forever. Beside him, Zhou Yu stood, all youth and fire, his words carrying the sting of steel. History remembers Zhou Yu as both brilliant and proud, sometimes consumed by rivalry with Zhuge Liang. But here, in these halls, his role was simpler: to convince Sun Quan that resistance was not suicide but strategy. He reminded his lord that Cao Cao's men marched thousands of li from the north. Their supply lines stretched like fraying rope. He spoke of the morale of soldiers pulled from plains and mountains and forced to fight on water that felt alien beneath their feet. Picture Sun Quan listening, the weight of empire heavy in his silence. He was no reckless fool, though later storytellers painted him with youthful boldness. Instead, he hesitated, weighing grain stores against river currents, the loyalty of generals against the threat of annihilation. Then, in a gesture carved into legend, he supposedly drew his sword and sliced through the desk before him. Wood cracked, splinters leapt, and silence filled the chamber. "I have decided," he declared, "to resist Cao Cao to the end." Did it really happen this way? The official histories make no mention of desks or swords. Perhaps the detail was invented centuries later, a dramatic flourish to give Sun Quan's choice cinematic weight. Yet whether or not the sword fell, the decision was real. And with it, an alliance took shape: Sun Quan of Jiangdong with Liu Bei, the displaced wanderer. Two men bound not by friendship, but by necessity. You might pause here and think about how fragile such alliances can be. Liu Bei needed protection and legitimacy. Sun Quan needed manpower and a partner who could help absorb Cao Cao's shock. Neither side truly trusted the other. Their messengers crossed the river with polite phrases, but behind those words hid calculation. Still, history shows that in moments of crisis, even reluctant hands can clasp tightly if the alternative is ruin. Beyond the council halls, the river carried whispers of change. Liu Bei's strategist Zhuge Liang, according to later tales, traveled south to persuade Sun Quan in person. Romance of the Three Kingdoms elevates this moment into a duel of wits, with Zhuge Liang speaking so persuasively that Sun Quan abandoned doubt in a heartbeat. The truth was less theatrical. Sun Quan's own officers, like Lu Su and Zhou Yu, were already committed to resistance. Zhuge Liang's role may have been important, but the seeds had been planted long before his words reached Sun Quan's ears. So the alliance was sealed. Soldiers of Shu and Wu, once strangers, began to prepare together. The air must have been thick with both relief and unease. Imagine campfires burning on opposite banks of the river, men glancing across at new allies, wondering whether they would still be allies when the battle was over. What lay ahead was no longer in council halls but on the currents of the Yangtze. The decision had been made. The question now was execution. And it is here, at the level of wooden planks and iron chains, that Cao Cao's greatest mistake was waiting to be revealed. Cao Cao's armada stretched along the river like a moving fortress. From a distance it must have seemed invincible, row after row of vessels, their masts bristling like a forest of pines, banners snapping in the cold wind. Yet within that apparent strength lay a weakness born of practicality. The Yangtze was no calm pond. Its currents could pitch ships against each other. Its winter winds could turn decks into traps for the unwary. For soldiers unused to water, the constant sway was disorienting, even sickening. Cao Cao sought to solve this by ordering his ships lashed together in solid lines. Imagine the ropes pulled tight, the hulls grinding side by side, until 100 boats felt like a single platform. To men from the northern plains, more familiar with galloping across flat earth than balancing on moving decks, the arrangement brought relief. No longer did they stumble from the rolling sway. Now the decks felt stable, almost like the fields they knew. A horse could trot across planks as if on solid ground, and formations could stand shoulder to shoulder without fear of tumbling into the river. From the standpoint of a commander, it was ingenious. Morale rose. Sickness abated as nausea subsided. Training drills suddenly seemed possible. Orders moved cleanly down the line, as if the ships were not a fleet but one continuous war machine. For a time, it seemed as though Cao Cao had tamed the river itself. But beneath this clever solution lurked danger. By binding his vessels so tightly, Cao Cao stripped them of flexibility. What might happen if fire struck one end of this floating platform? In separating ships, flames could be contained, but chained together, a single spark might spread as swiftly as rumor through a crowded marketplace. Even without fire, storms or sudden winds could turn the rigid line into a giant trap, crushing itself against rocks or shoals. It is here that history and legend begin to diverge. Some records suggest that Cao Cao's chaining strategy was widely known, while others imply that it was noticed by southern scouts only later. Romance of the Three Kingdoms paints it as a fatal hubris, almost a divine setup for Zhuge Liang's brilliance. But step back for a moment, was it arrogance, or simply necessity? Faced with seasick soldiers, dwindling discipline, and the unfamiliar rhythm of river warfare, Cao Cao made a choice that eased immediate problems, even if it planted seeds for catastrophe. South of the river, Zhou Yu observed carefully. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, lingered on the strange stillness of the enemy fleet. He saw ships that no longer rocked independently, but swayed as one. Perhaps he smiled at that sight. Perhaps he kept his thoughts veiled. For Zhou Yu, it was an opportunity waiting for the right hand to strike. You can almost imagine the conversation by firelight. Southern officers leaning close, their shadows dancing on canvas walls. One pointed toward the north, whispering of the chained decks. Another suggested ways to exploit it. Zhou Yu listened, storing each detail like kindling, knowing he would need both timing and courage to turn observation into victory. This choice Cao Cao's binding of his fleet is one of those decisions where history reminds us of the paradox of command. To solve today's crisis, a leader may create tomorrow's disaster. It's easy for us to see with hindsight, but in that moment on the Yangtze, with men groaning from nausea and discipline slipping, the ropes must have looked like salvation. Night thickened over the water. Lanterns glowed faintly along the line of tethered ships, a ribbon of light that wound across the current. Soldiers settled into uneasy sleep, unaware that the very stability they now enjoyed might one day be the tinder of their downfall. And far to the south, Zhou Yu sharpened, not his blade, but his ideas, for in war, what burns first is not wood or rope but opportunity. On the southern bank, where campfires burned low, and the air smelled faintly of ash and pine, an older general named Huang Gai prepared to gamble everything on a deception. His plan, preserved in chronicles but embellished richly in later tales, was both painful and daring, to make Cao Cao believe that he had been punished by Zhou Yu and was now ready to defect with a gift of ships. The story begins with lashes. Imagine the scene. Zhou Yu, playing his role in the drama, orders Huang Gai beaten in front of assembled soldiers. Whips crack against flesh, blood darkens the ground, and Huang Gai staggers but does not cry out. To the men watching, it looks like a brutal humiliation. Yet beneath the performance lay calculation, pain turned into camouflage. Messengers rushed northward, carrying word of Huang Gai's disgrace. Soon, a letter followed, penned in Huang Gai's steady hand, offering surrender to Cao Cao if only he would accept his loyalty. Now pause and consider, did this happen exactly as described? The official histories are cautious. They note the ruse, but do not dwell on the theatrics. Romance of the Three Kingdoms, on the other hand, heightens every detail. Zhou Yu's anger staged to perfection, Huang Gai collapsing dramatically, the atmosphere charged like a scene rehearsed for theatre. Whether the lashes were real or exaggerated, the effect was the same. Cao Cao received word of a defection that seemed believable. The bait was sweetened further. Huang Gai promised to bring ships laden with supplies, grain, wine, and goods that would be a welcome prize for an army far from home. For Cao Cao, already stretched thin by distance and disease, the offer was tempting. To refuse would risk losing a potential ally and supplies. To accept meant opening the door to treachery. What would you have done, sitting in his tent? The letter spread out under flickering lamplight, while the muffled coughs of sick soldiers echoed outside. Huang Gai, meanwhile, prepared the gifts. Ships were loaded not with grain but with bundles of reeds, brushwood, and oil-soaked tinder. Pitch smeared the decks until they gleamed dark in torchlight. Every vessel became a floating torch, silent for now, waiting only for the right gust of wind to awaken their true purpose. Soldiers assigned to the mission knew they were sailing into fire. It was a task that demanded both courage and resignation. If fortune smiled, they would leap into the river at the last moment. If not, they would vanish with the blaze. Think of the atmosphere in those preparations, the hush of men binding ropes, the acrid sting of oil, the tense glance from one sailor to another. Perhaps they whispered prayers, or perhaps they focused only on their knots, because in war, sometimes the smallest detail decides whether you live or die. Huang Gai himself must have carried the weight heavily. His body still bore the marks of lashes, whether staged or real. Each bruise was not just pain, but proof of loyalty to Zhou Yu's plan. He knew that even if he succeeded, history might not remember him as clearly as Zhuge Liang or Zhou Yu. Yet without his sacrifice, the battle's fire would never ignite. When word reached Cao Cao that Huang Gai's battered figure was approaching with ships, he allowed them to draw nearer. The winds that night would soon decide whether suspicion or trust filled the gap. Cao Cao's men leaned over railings, peering into the dark. Perhaps some muttered that the approach seemed strange. Perhaps others, hungry for supplies, urged their general to welcome the convoy. Cao Cao, confident in his chained fleet, prepared to accept the offering. But the river has a way of keeping secrets until the last possible moment. Would Huang Gai's battered loyalty prove real, or would his blazing betrayal light up the Yangtze like dawn? That answer, hidden in the whisper of the coming wind, was only a breath away. The Yangtze in winter is restless, its breath shifting between icy stillness and sudden gusts. To launch Huang Gai's fire ships successfully, the southern commanders needed more than courage, they needed the right wind. And this is where legend begins to overtake memory. If you've ever heard the tale of Red Cliffs, you probably recall Zhuge Liang standing in white robes, raising his arms to the heavens, and borrowing an east wind through sheer mastery of the cosmos. In Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the scene is theatrical. Zhuge Liang, calm and unhurried, performs rituals under starry skies, invoking celestial forces as awed soldiers look on. The wind, obedient as a trained falcon, shifts exactly when he commands it, carrying fire straight into Cao Cao's chained fleet. But what about the quieter record of history? The official chronicles are far less dramatic. They mention no conjuring, no magical borrowing, only that a favorable easterly wind arose at the crucial time. Was it chance? Careful observation of weather patterns? Or later embroidery to cast Zhuge Liang as a near-divine figure? Think about it. The middle reaches of the Yangtze, in late autumn and early winter, usually blow with steady northwesterlies. Easterly gusts are rarer, but not impossible. A strategist who studied seasonal winds might have anticipated a shift, even if he couldn't predict the precise night. Zhuge Liang, known for his meticulous knowledge, could very well have gambled on the river's temperament. If fortune smiled, it would seem like sorcery. If fortune turned, the plan would collapse. The tale of the east wind reveals something deeper about how stories are told. People love to believe that one brilliant mind, one dramatic gesture, can bend nature to human will. It's tidier, more inspiring than the messy reality of weather, luck, and guesswork. Yet, Sitting by your own bedside tonight, perhaps you can appreciate both the scientific patience of observing the sky and the dreamlike power of a legend where the wind itself bows to genius. As the night of battle approached, tension coiled through the camps. Men on the southern side whispered of omens, of stars glowing brighter, of winds stirring reeds in unusual ways. Across the river, Cao Cao's soldiers, unaware of the approaching trick, huddled in their chained vessels. Their decks were steady, their lines secure, but every rope, binding ship to ship, was also a fuse waiting for flame. Picture it, the moon veiled in thin cloud, the river glistening like hammered silver. Then, faint at first, a breeze slid across the water, rippling lantern light into trembling halos. The east wind had come. Whether summoned by ritual or by chance, it carried with it the fate of empires. Huang Gai's flotilla began to move, dark silhouettes against darker water, drifting slowly toward Cao Cao's glittering line. The soldiers aboard gripped ropes and smeared pitch, hearts thudding louder than the oars. The night held its breath, as if the river itself knew that history was about to ignite. And then came the moment when distance closed, when suspicion gave way to trust, and when trust was about to be betrayed. The wind pressed steady against the sails, urging them onward. In that quiet, before the first spark leapt, you can almost hear the question hanging in the air: would the night remain calm, or would it explode into fire? The flotilla drifted closer, its outlines faint in the winter haze. To Cao Cao's lookouts, the ships must have seemed like weary allies, bringing relief-battered decks, sails sagging, lanterns bobbing gently with the current. But below those decks, hidden beneath planks and mats, waited bundles of reeds soaked in oil, jars of resin, and piles of tinder packed so tightly that even a single spark would leap eagerly from one to the next. At the signal, Huang Gai's men struck torches. Imagine the hush before the roar, the flick of flames that at first looked like ordinary lantern light, then blossomed into searing orange, devouring sails and rigging. The fire caught with shocking speed, fed by resin and pushed forward by the east wind. Within moments, each vessel of the ruse became a moving inferno, a blazing spear racing toward Cao Cao's chained fleet. For the northern soldiers, the realization came too late. Their ships, once a comfort in their stability, now betrayed them. Bound together, they could not scatter, could not maneuver away from the oncoming fire. Panic rippled down the line as men scrambled to cut ropes, but the flames arrived faster than knives could sever cords. One ship ignited another, and then another, until the entire line was a single raging torch stretched across the river. Think about the sensory chaos: the crack of timbers splitting, the hiss of pitch exploding, the choking smoke rolling low across the decks. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the river reflected a nightmare of twisting shadows. To stand there would have been to feel heat bite your skin while icy water lapped against the hull, offering both death and escape. Some leapt overboard, only to vanish into the dark current. Others fought to free their ships, hacking desperately at chains already engulfed in flame. Southern observers on the riverbank must have watched in awe and terror. Victory was unfolding before their eyes, yet the sheer spectacle was overwhelming. The night sky glowed as if dawn had come early, though it was a dawn made of fire. Zhou Yu, calm amid the tumult, directed follow-up attacks to press the advantage, while Huang Gai himself was wounded leaping into the river, later rescued to become part of the tale's heroic fabric. But pause here. How much of this do we know for certain? The official histories confirm the fire attack and Cao Cao's disastrous losses, but they are spare in detail. The novel, by contrast, gives us vivid imagery: ships exploding like fireworks, soldiers consumed in cinematic swaths of flame, Zhuge Liang smiling in serene triumph. The truth probably lay somewhere between: a devastating but chaotic fire, less choreographed than legend, yet no less decisive. The river carried the blaze southward, embers swirling like fireflies against the stars. Cao Cao, forced to abandon his burning fleet, retreated in haste toward land. The pride of the north was undone not by numbers, but by ropes, reeds, and a well-timed wind. And as the smoke drifted away, the Yangtze itself seemed to sigh. What had begun as a calculated gamble had ended as a roaring inferno, reshaping the balance of power for generations. But disaster on water was only the beginning. The retreat across land, plagued by disease and ambush, would decide whether Cao Cao's defeat was temporary or the birth of a new order entirely. The river still smouldered in memory as Cao Cao led what remained of his army back toward the north. His fleet had been reduced to charred wrecks, his supplies scattered, his soldiers shaken not only by flame, but by the realization that their great general could be undone by trickery and wind. Retreat was the only option, yet retreat along riverbanks and narrow roads is rarely graceful. The path wound through wetlands and low hills, where mist clung to. Reeds and the ground gave way under heavy boots. Here, the damage of disease became clear. The army had marched long distances before the battle, crowded into ships that bred sickness, and now, with winter pressing in, fever and dysentery spread faster than orders. Men dropped their weapons and staggered off the road in search of water, some never returning. Horses, gaunt and shivering, collapsed in the mud. A proud army of hundreds of thousands dwindled with each passing day. To the south, Zhou Yu and Sun Quan's commanders seized the chance to pursue. Skirmishes erupted along Cao Cao's line of march, small ambushes at river crossings, sudden strikes from hillsides. They weren't large enough to destroy his force outright, but each one chipped away at morale. Soldiers muttered that heaven itself had turned against them. The flame of red cliffs had not only burned ships, it had burned confidence. Liu Bei, meanwhile, saw opportunity. In the wake of Cao Cao's retreat, he moved swiftly to secure territory. His men, hardened by years of survival, flowed into abandoned strongholds and towns left vulnerable by the northern collapse. Every step of Cao Cao's backward march created space for Liu Bei to step forward, planting seeds of the kingdom he would one day rule. The scale of the defeat is debated. Official histories downplay numbers, cautious not to stain too deeply the legacy of a man as influential as Cao Cao. Later storytellers, however, revel in exaggeration. They describe tens of thousands of bodies, clogging rivers, plagues sweeping camps like judgment, and ambushes so devastating they seemed guided by gods. Between sober fact and fiery fiction lies the reality. An exhausted army retreating in disarray, harried by disease and pursuit, its aura of invincibility cracked. Picture the roads littered with abandoned wagons, the wheels sunk into mire. Picture soldiers trudging past the carcasses of horses, their armor dulled by smoke and mud, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Picture Cao Cao himself, once so confident, now silent on horseback, his thoughts racing faster than his weary mount. Leaders often endure victories publicly and defeats privately. Perhaps only his closest aides glimpsed the weight pressing on him. By the time the remnants of the northern army reached safer ground, the south had gained more than a victory. They had proven that resistance against overwhelming force was possible. The Yangtze had become not a barrier to conquest, but the boundary line of survival. Out of its smoke and ashes, 3 kingdoms would emerge, balanced uneasily on either side. And still, the question lingered like haze over the river. Who truly deserved the credit for this turning point? Was it Zhou Yu's careful orchestration, Huang Gai's painful ruse, or Zhuge Liang's legendary east wind? The answer, like the river itself, shifted depending on where you stood. As Cao Cao retreated northward, the story of Red Cliffs began its own journey from mud and fever into the realm of memory and myth. And it is there, in the contest between fact and fiction, that the battle would never truly end. In the years that followed, the smoke of Red Cliffs refused to fade. The battle became more than a military episode. It became a canvas upon which generations painted their hopes, their heroes, and their rivalries. To understand its afterlife, you have to picture not only soldiers and ships, but storytellers hunched over scrolls, opera singers in painted masks, and eventually, novelists weaving thousands of pages into one of the most enduring tales in Chinese literature. Take Zhou Yu, for example. In the immediate aftermath, he was celebrated as the architect of victory. His keen eye saw the flaw in Cao Cao's chained fleet, and his steady leadership steered Sun Quan's forces toward triumph. Yet later retellings, especially Romance of the Three Kingdoms, shifted the spotlight. Suddenly, Zhou Yu became a man overshadowed by jealousy, constantly outwitted by Zhuge Liang, his brilliance eclipsed by another's legend. Was this fair? Probably not. But myth seldom cares for fairness. It rewards the characters who capture imagination, not necessarily the ones who did the hard work. And then Zhuge Liang himself, the strategist, elevated to near mystical status. In sober history, he was a young advisor during Red Cliffs, important, but not central. In the novel, however, he's the conductor of miracles, summoning the east wind, manipulating fate itself. Why such exaggeration? Perhaps because readers longed for the archetype of the wise sage, someone who could bend the chaos of war with nothing but intellect. The wind became not meteorology, but destiny proof that the heavens smiled on genius. Cao Cao, too, emerged transformed. Defeat might have ruined a lesser figure, but in memory he became the tragic Titan, brilliant, ambitious, undone not by incompetence but by overreach. Some saw him as villain, others as flawed hero, yet nearly everyone agreed that without his towering presence, the Age of Three Kingdoms would lose its gravity. Over centuries, plays and operas embroidered the battle with pageantry. Actors spun in crimson robes, sleeves fluttering like flames. Gongs thundered to imitate drums of war, while painted ships on stage rocked gently as if on real water. Audiences gasped at Huang Gai's whipping, chuckled at Cao Cao's arrogance, and waited eagerly for the moment when fire consumed the stage in a riot of sound and color. Even now, standing on the cliffs above the Yangtze, you can find plaques and museums claiming this or that spot as the true site of the battle. Archaeologists debate, historians compare texts, but certainty remains elusive. Was the battle fought at modern Chibi, or slightly upriver at Wulin? Each new discovery seems to answer one question while raising two more. The land itself seems to enjoy keeping its secrets, as if the river does not wish to surrender the exact coordinates of its most famous blaze. And perhaps that is fitting, because Red Cliffs lives less in soil and water than in imagination. It is the clash where fact and fiction entwine, where bruised soldiers march beside painted heroes, and where a gust of wind can be both accident and miracle. For listeners like you, lying back in the hush of night, it becomes a reminder that history is not only about what happened, but about what people choose to remember. So as the river darkens once more in your mind, ask yourself, what lingers longer, the truth of Cao Cao's defeat, or the legend of Zhuge Liang's wind? Which version keeps you awake with wonder, and which lulls you into sleep with the comfort of a story well told? Maybe the answer is both. The flames on the river have quieted now. The cries of soldiers and the clash of steel fade into a softer memory, like embers that glow faintly before turning to ash. What lingers is not the heat of battle but the rhythm of water, flowing steadily through centuries, carrying with it the voices of those who fought and those who later imagined what they had done. As you breathe slowly, picture the Yangtze at dawn after the battle mist hanging low, the charred skeletons of ships drifting silently downstream, and reeds bending gently in the breeze. The river does not hold grudges. It simply moves on, smoothing over fire and fury until only ripples remain. In the same way, your mind can let go of the sharp edges tonight. The noise of your day, the worries that clung to you like smoke, can be set gently on the current. Watch them drift away, growing smaller with each breath, until they disappear beyond the bend. Let the stillness spread through you. Shoulders sink into your pillow the way anchors sink into quiet water. Each inhale draws in calm, each exhale releases weight you no longer need. Just as the alliance at Red Cliffs reshaped history, you too can reshape the story of your night, not with fire and wind, but with rest and ease. Think of how legends softened the harsh truths of war into something people could hold on to. Tonight, your thoughts can soften too, reshaping themselves into dreams where battles are far away and peace lies close at hand. The river flows on, time flows on, and you are part of that same gentle current. Sleep well, and let history keep watch while you drift.